Harassment. What does it mean and who can be charged with it? So harassment can be charged against a person who with the intent to harass, annoy, or alarm another person and with no intent of legitimate communication if they make a telephone call, and by telephone call, the other person does not even need to answer the phone. If they just leave a voicemail, or if someone calls over and over and over and over again just to annoy them, then that could entail harassment. That communication could be by telegraph, mail, or any other form of written communication. So that goes back kind of to an older time period where telegraphs were more common or mail was more common, but still email, anything like that, that written communication, if the content in there rises to the level that we'll talk about in a minute, it can be charged as harassment. If an obscene message or indecent or profane words are spread on a citizen's radio channel, like could be walkie-talkie, anything like that, or over a computer network or other form of electronic communication, if the conduct is deemed to be harassment, which again we'll get into in a second, and is communicated over any of those mediums, then that could rise to that charge being filed. Now, what kind of content rises to the level of harassment? It's not enough that you just email someone or call someone or talk to someone on the phone. It has to be a certain type of conduct that's prohibited. So that conduct can be if it's excessive communication with no legitimate purpose. Again, I use the example of just calling and calling and calling and calling, or texting and texting and texting and texting, emailing over and over again. Anything like that could be harassment. But it doesn't have to be repeated behavior. It can be fewer incidents if that message that's being transmitted is obscene or indecent or profane or something like that. And for it to be obscene, you kind of have a reasonable person standard for what could be obscene. So it's deemed obscene if it's applying the standards of today. The code says contemporary standards. So standards of today, if a normal person would find that the theme of the message, the overall reason of the message, appeals to the prurient interest of sex. So again, that's old-timey language, but that just means mostly if it's sexual in nature. It goes on to say if it could be considered obscene if it's referring to sexual conduct in a patently offensive way. And then finally, it can be considered obscene if it, as a whole, lacks serious artistic, literary, political, or scientific value. And that last line in there has to do with, a lot of times, sending naked photos or anything like that. Sometimes art and stuff, there are naked people in art and it's considered sexual, but it's artistic value. This is just sending nudes or something like that, something inappropriate, unwanted to someone. And again, it doesn't have to be over and over again. That's section 1 of what we talked about, where it's repeated communication. But if it's obscene and there's no real basis for it, if it's unwanted, you can be charged with harassment. So we're seeing it charged more and more now in Indiana, especially with the rise in electronic communications. So if you think you might have committed some form of harassment, or if you're being investigated for harassment, or if you have charges filed against you for harassment, it's very important, 1, that you cease communication with that person who doesn't want that communication, because that's just going to make the matter worse. So make sure you stop communicating with them, and then 2, seek counsel immediately so that we can help out with the situation and see what we can do to mitigate the situation and help you out with it. So we can absolutely help out with harassment cases. We help with them both in a protective order standpoint as well as in a criminal standpoint, like we talked about today. So if you're dealing with a situation like this, or you think you might be guilty of it and someone's looking into it, give us a call so we can help. 317-632-3642. And remember, always plead the 5th.